The meeting between President Joe Biden and President Vladimir Putin last week was the focus of much international interest as the two leaders sat down in Geneva. Concluding their 4-hour talks, they shook hands on avoiding nuclear war, reducing arms, and returning ambassadors to their posts in Washington and Beijing. But without addressing the most contentious issues between them, can they achieve strategic stability as pledged? And what impact will their actions have on countries here in the Asia-Pacific? For this, we turn to Jim Townsend, a joint senior fellow at the Center of a New American Security, who served as the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for NATO and Europe. We're also joined by Professor Chilamkuri Mohan, Director of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore, who was formerly a member of India's National Security Advisory Board. Warm welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, to jump straight into this discussion, Mr. Townsend, why don't we start with you first? Now, before the summit happened, it seemed that there wasn't much expectation of major breakthroughs to be made between the two leaders. But Mr. Biden and Mr. Putin, they both seemed quite satisfied with the outcome. And, well, your president said that he did what he came to do. So what do you think the leaders were trying to get out of this face-to-face summit?
Well, I think President Biden particularly wanted to do a couple of things. One was he wanted to make sure Putin understood where President Biden, stood in terms of the hacking that we've experienced here in the U.S., the cyber attacks, in terms of Ukraine, in terms of other examples of Putin breaking the international norms that we've all come to expect. He needed to say to Putin that this was unacceptable to the United States and to warn him that we wouldn't sit back and just allow this to occur. And the second thing he wanted to do was to have these stability talks. I think President Biden certainly remembers during the Cold War when we were able to have a relationship with the Soviet Union that was more predictable and therefore more stable. And I think he wants to return to a period where, through communications, through understanding of one another, that the environment can be more stable, more predictable. And that's what he felt he was able to do.
Professor Mohan, I really want to hear your view on this as well. What do you think the two leaders wanted out of this meeting in Geneva, and what do you think would be the next step in terms of really actually making their relationship predictable and stable as they desire?
I think for Biden, the important thing was to arrest the free fall of this relationship. For the last decade and a half, the U.S.-Russia relationship had been on a steady downturn. So any arrest of that and introducing some stability would make it easier, I presume, for President Biden to pursue his own other agenda, including that in Asia. For Putin, I would think that, look, he needed acknowledgement. Look, Russia is a great power. Russia is important. Russia needs to be engaged on global issues like arms control. So I think you've seen the reaction in Russian media. They're quite happy that Biden is being respectful to Putin, as well as calling Russia a great power, and to return to a level where engaging Russia becomes part of the diplomatic agenda of the United States. So I think there was enough for both of them. The next steps would be the real results we'll know in the next few months. One, if there is progress on the so-called nuclear arms control and strategic stability talks. Other is what Biden so strongly highlighted, cybersecurity. If they can begin to talk and produce some outcomes, for example, on critical infrastructure, that would be real progress.
Mr. Townsend, according to the leaders' joint statement, they committed to ensuring predictability in the strategic sphere, really reducing the risk of armed conflicts and the threat of nuclear war. Are you optimistic about this? I mean, to what extent do you think the two powers can actually cooperate, especially on arms control?
Well, I'm optimistic when compared to the relationship as it has been over the past few years with the United States, particularly our Our administration at that time was chaotic, and our relationship with Russia was something that was confusing to not just the Russians, but confusing to ourselves. And that's not a predictable relationship, and that doesn't lead to stability. So, yes, I am optimistic because we have started to talk. We were able to express ourselves, both the president and President Putin expressed themselves in a very direct way, very clear way, where each stood, and there was an acknowledgement that both sides wanted to see something that was stable, something that involved confidence-building measures, something that involved working towards arms control. I think it was clear that with President Putin, he doesn't want to have an unpredictable relationship either. He has enough problems of his own to worry about, and I think for him, in terms of his relationship with the U.S., he is not looking for trouble. I don't think he wants trouble, and I think what we have to do is make sure that through discussions and through wherever we can to work together on items of common interest, that we can achieve through this kind of work a stability. But we can't kid ourselves that President Putin will certainly do whatever he feels he needs to, whenever opportunity presents itself, to take advantage of something out of the interest for Russia. He's not going to put that aside. But I think at the end of the day, he doesn't want trouble with the United States.
And Mr. Townsend, do you think a part of the reason why President Biden is really seeking this predictable relationship with Russia is because he wants to really focus on China?
Well, I think he wants... Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, we'll go with you first, Mr. Townsend, if that's okay.
I think President Biden wants to have a stable relationship with Moscow for its own good. I think that was his top priority, was to bring about this more predictable, this more stable relationship. I think that will enable him to focus on China, which is his top priority. And I think for Russia, I think the Russians don't mind the Chinese feeling a little pressure as well. As the Chinese look at Moscow and Washington beginning to talk to one another. That puts pressure on Beijing too. So I think that right now, for Mr. Biden, I think the focus was on Moscow and on U.S. Russia relations. But that's going to help the president deal with China as well.
Now, Professor Mohan, your thoughts on this? I mean, before his summit with President Putin, President Joe Biden was reaching out to America's allies, India, Indo-Pacific, NATO countries, as well as this G7 summit that they had last week. And well, he was really trying to strengthen his alliances to really solidify the democratic sort of rules-based order in the world. And in response, it seems that Russia and China have been moving a bit closer together to scale up their bilateral cooperations on various fields, including nuclear energy, climate change, and even space. How do you analyze their relations, the relationship between Beijing and Moscow? And do you see them going as far as to forming their own Quad-like alliance?
Look, I think, as Putin himself has said, that, look, this relationship has never been as good as it is today. And Chinese media have said, look, the American strategy of splitting Russia from China is not going to work. But the fact we know that in the last 50 odd years, I mean, Russia and China have had a fairly, relationship that went roller coaster. In the 50s, they were great buddies. They were ideological soulmates. In the 60s, they had a falling out, and there was even a conflict on the border. 60s and 70s, they were rivals in the region. And the normalization took place in the 80s. But it's really in the last 2 decades that the relationship has been brought together, and largely because of their concerns with the West. But for Putin, there is a problem that in the 50s, Russia was the senior partner in the relationship. And today, it is the junior partner. Chinese GDP is almost 10 times bigger than Russia's. And not having a reasonable relationship with either Europe or the United States has left President Putin totally dependent on the Chinese political support. So I think as any good leader, I'm sure he's looking for some wiggle room. And my sense is if he gets it from the West, hopefully this summit has opened the door for that he would be quite happy to expand his room for maneuver so that he's not tied totally to China. So I think I'll be surprised if Putin is not going to take this opportunity to widen his relationship, while at the same time, he's not going to abandon immediately or in the near future the special relationship he has with Putin. But the important thing for Russia is to increase its room for maneuver. And I think the door seems to have been opened by President Biden.
And Professor Mohan, how would U.S.-Russia ties really affect the geopolitical dynamics of the Indo-Pacific region, where countries like India and South Korea, they've got some shared security interests with Moscow?
I think one of the problems in Asia has been for us that the Russian tilt towards China on the regional issues has made it even harder for the region to deal with. For example, Japan has sought normalization with Russia in the last few years. That has got nowhere. India, of course, has always had a strong relationship with the Russians, but India is also deeply concerned about the deepening Russia-China relationship. So I think if a Russia that remains neutral, even in the disputes between China and its neighbors, that is a win for the rest of the region, and a Russia that is willing to help India, which is based on the past partnership, to stand up to China on its defense by the border conflict, or if it supports Vietnam to be able to increase its room for maneuver vis-a-vis China, all that will be for the benefit. A Russia that plays an independent role in Asia and not an adjunct to China would be very, very welcome in many capitals of Asia, I would think.
Now, Mr. Townsend, in the meantime, President Putin after the summit, he once again brushed off concerns regarding Russia's state-sanctioned cyber attacks, human rights issues, as well as the question of Ukraine. Do you think these areas of concern, especially cybersecurity, will ever be up for discussion between Presidents Biden and Putin, or do you think Moscow is going to continue denying and acting up? How do you think the US should really prepare to tackle these issues?
Well, I think President Putin will continue to deny that they have any role in cyber attack. He'll deny human rights problems, and he will continue to act up. That is how he conducts his foreign policy in Europe and globally, and towards the United States. But at the same time, I think in terms of cybersecurity, we've already begun talks with the Russians. Certainly the Biden-Putin summit, we were able to express to him a way forward to deal with rules of the road, if you will, in terms of cyber attacks. What types of targets are off the table? What are we going to understand about one another if there were to be an attack on critical U.S. infrastructure? What can President Putin understand will happen to him in terms of some type of counter from the United States? I think President Biden made very clear that he would respond in kind. So yes, I do believe while on the one hand there will be acting out, there will be continued games, if you will, that the Putin will play on the one hand. But on the other hand, I think in terms of cybersecurity, there is a desire by the Russians not to, again, like I said earlier, not to do something in the cyber world or to be seen as sponsoring something in the cyber world that has a major impact on the United States where he could feel a counterattack. So yes, I think there will be progress in talks trying to lay out and establish boundaries when it comes to hacking and cyber.
Well, President Joe Biden has certainly made it very clear that he won't take any more sort of autocratic values or actions in the world. And Professor Mohan, Mr. Biden, he reiterated on various occasions that America is back, and of course he wants to get the solid backing of US allies. However, there has been some reluctance in Europe as well as Asia to get fully on board with what was initially a anti-China initiative or the Build Back Better World infrastructure plan that was also recently announced. Do you think the US is offering enough reason or incentives for its allies to cooperate, or do you think it should provide more support in terms of maybe economic incentives or vaccines to really get its allies on board? The questions for you, Professor Mohan.
Yeah, okay. I mean, look, I think the allies, there is a lag between an American policy of moving on a different course and the allies ready to work with that line. I think we've always seen it in Europe and in Asia too. I mean, people have got so comfortable with the U.S.-China partnership and integration, economic integration, that today many of them are reluctant to immediately get on to the new line of action that President Biden is proposing. But my sense is what Biden has achieved in this trip is really to draw the allies in, put China up there as a serious agenda item. The Europeans to different degrees have come along. And before even these, I mean, I think he received the Prime Minister of Japan and the President of Korea. So the Asia focus is going to be there. My sense, and then the Quad meeting, a digital meeting of the Quad took place. So my sense is Biden is moving things along. And I think unlike Trump, while he was fighting with his allies, even as he focused on China, today the attempt is to develop a coherent response, whether it is on the technology question, whether it's on the security question, whether it's on the vaccine question. Yes, the beginnings are being made, and my sense is this is going to move on, and many of the allies will come around. But on the specific question of money, yes, on the Green Belt and Road initiative that President Biden and G7 are talking about, they need to show the resources. But the fact is Europe does devote a lot of resources for infrastructure building. Japan has a partnership for quality infrastructure. So the question is, how do you pool these resources into an effective mechanism rather than the absence of resources? So I think that's where the challenge is to build an institutional structure that can offer an alternative to many who are looking for alternatives to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. So if there is another player in the field, I think for many countries, it would certainly be welcome rather than depend on just one single source as the builder of infrastructure in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, due to time, I'm afraid that's where we must leave it today. But that was Jim Townsend, a Senior Professor at the Center of a New American Security, and Professor Chilamkuri Raja Mohan, Director of the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, as always, thank you very much for watching.